So thanks for the opportunity to speak the word at your Pride service on this Sunday Pride morning. And thanks for the insistence of God calling us to justice in the prophetic tradition. Because that's what today's gospel passage is about. Luke 4:16 marks the beginning of Jesus' ministry. He emerges from the wilderness after 40 days of meditation and fasting following his baptism in the River Jordan. As he prepares to begin his ministry, Jesus goes to his hometown of Nazareth. And there, on a fine Saturday Sabbath morning, perhaps in late June, Jesus is at the local synagogue, and they ask him to read. He moves to the lectern, opens the scroll, and begins to read from the prophet Isaiah. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he returns to his seat and proceeds to throw gasoline on the fire. He looks around at the people and says, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." And all hell breaks loose. Jesus proclaims that this is the year of the Lord's favor has been embodied in their hearing. And Jesus, of course, is talking about Jubilee, when there's a giant reset and all divisions and inequity are gone. All debts are forgiven, the land is returned. This is an ancient and holy promise, the call of hope, the promise of justice for all, the promise of Jubilee. So when Jesus tells the people that this ancient prophecy has been fulfilled in their hearing, they're outraged. They look around and say, "Who is this punk? Isn't this Joseph's son? That mediocre carpenter? Why doesn't someone tell him to shut up?" They're so offended that they chase him off a cliff. But Jesus slips through the crowd. And as he escapes, he remarks that a prophet is never accepted in his hometown. I would add that a good prophet is not accepted anywhere. As Jesus would discover several months later at the Passover festival, where he ends up being tortured and murdered in an act of state terrorism and left to bleed out on the cross. And this happens to prophets all too often. Prophecies not for the faint of heart. Jesus places himself in the tradition of the prophets, in the tradition of his ancestors, of Isaiah and Ezekiel, of Amos, who tells us that God will not rest until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like an overflowing stream. Of Micah, who reminds us of the call to seek justice and practice kindness as we walk humbly with our God. And we must not lose prophecy in the Christian tradition. We need the prophets to remind us that the call to justice permeating the universe, to remind us that justice delayed is justice denied. Prophecy is important, and so it's important to understand prophecy. Prophecy is not predicting the future. It's not fortune telling. The prophets often tell people, in this case Israel, that their society will come to a spiritual and physical death if they intentionally refuse God's insistence on radical neighbor love. But prophecy has little to do with the work of psychics we see advertised on Bloor Avenue. More accurately, prophecy is responding to the insistence of God, the insistence that all creation is good, that we're all worthy and that our humanity is to be celebrated, no matter your gender, no matter who you love, or where your ancestors live, or the color of your skin, or your physical ability. Your humanity is not up for debate. Jesus places himself in the tradition of the prophets, and we need prophets today, like Reverend Dr. William Barber, Cornel West, and our own Sherry DeNovo. When there's an injustice, Sherry speaks to it and insists that it must not continue. And prophecy is especially needed today with the rise of fascism, which is happening right now, with a strong man in power in places like the Philippines, Poland, the United States, Ontario. We need prophets. We need prophecy. With the yellow vests and soldiers of Odin attacking queer and trans people in Hamilton and Vancouver. We need to prophesy. And perhaps the prophetic imagination can open our ancient stories to help us understand how to confront the sins of homophobia and transphobia, of racism and ableism, and misogyny, and the existence of poverty amid untold riches. So perhaps today, in your hearing, the prophet Ezekiel can open us to what really happened at Sodom. Now, I'm sure you've heard the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom is a city filled with sin. And this is true as well for the daughters of Sodom, which are the cities in the surrounding area. And the sin is so great that God vows to drown Sodom in a lake of sulfur and fire. And eventually the only people who escape are Lot and his family. Now there's a particular event that exemplifies the sins of Sodom and her daughters. The story goes like this. There are two angels, or divine messengers, who are inside Lot's house when a gang of ruffians come banging on the door. And they tell Lot to send out these aliens, the strangers, so that they may know them. That they may know them. This is a euphemism for sexual acts. This is the line that homophobes use to condemn gay men and lesbians. This is where the term sodomy and sodomite come from. Homophobes, in their bigotry, imply that this refers to consensual same-gender sex. But the problem is, that's not what the story's about. This is not about sex. The ruffians are not asking for a date. They're not saying, send out your friends so we can go to Glad Day for a nice coffee. Or they're not even saying, hey, let's go to the bathhouse. This is not about sex at all. No, it's not about sex. It's about rape. And rape is never about sex. It's about power and subjugation. The ruffians want the angels to come out so they can rape them in a terroristic tactic still used today. This passage has nothing to do with sex and everything to do with rape. This is the sins of Sodom. You see, the sins of Sodom have nothing to do with consensual same-gender love and everything to do with violence and oppression. And the prophet Ezekiel supports this reading. It speaks of abominations, but that's not consensual kinky fun. The sins of Sodom are not authentic same-gender love, but if you want to know what they are, then hear this. This is the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had arrogance, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and the needy. Arrogance, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and the needy. This is no indictment on queer and trans people, but a description of our world today, of 21st century democratic capitalism. This is the world in which we live, with a growing disparity of wealth, where the 1%ers live in unimaginable luxury, stepping around people, sleeping on a grate on the way to their office on Bay Street. The sins of Sodom are not binary people in polyamorous relationships. The sins of Sodom are the blood of black, indigenous, and brown trans women sex workers, soaking the soil of Brazil, the US, and beyond. The sins of Sodom is quibbling over the word genocide when missing and murdered indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit women are hunted for sport. The sins of Sodom is a serial killer in the village while the police watch like it's a Netflix series. These are the sins of Sodom. Not gay sex, not polyamory, not trans women, not gender nonconforming children. These are the sins of Sodom. So what's a prophet to do? What's a prophet to say? And all we can say is, not today. Today, it's different. Today, everything changes because the Spirit of the Lord is upon you, calling you to justice and right relationship. The Spirit of the Lord is calling you to Jubilee. Today, on this Pride Sunday, everything changes. Today, we say no to the death dealers and the life stealers, and we say yes to liberation and well-being for all. Today, we say yes to trans women of color. Today, we say yes to sex workers. Today, we say yes to GSAs. Today, we celebrate humanity in all persons, in all differences. Because in our hearing today, Jesus tells us that the Spirit of the Lord is upon us. Today, Jesus tells us that the Spirit of the Lord has anointed us to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives, and to let the oppressed go free. Because today is a new day. Today is a day where we proclaim Jubilee. Today we fulfill the promise of a new heaven and a new earth. And today these words have been fulfilled in your hearing. Let those accept this who can.